Welcome to Aviation Stories Uncovered. In this episode, the Douglas DC-3, a revolutionary aircraft that changed the world of aviation. On December 17, 1935, exactly 32 years to the day after the Wright brothers' first flight, a twin-engine airliner lifted off for the first time from Clover Field in Santa Monica, California. It looked, at first glance, like just another airliner among many being developed in the competitive 1930s. It would go on to become arguably the most influential and longest-serving aircraft design in the history of aviation. A machine so fundamentally right that engineers today still marvel at how little its basic layout ever needed to change over the decades that followed. The Douglas DC-3 grew out of an earlier design, the DC-2, after American Airlines Cyrus Smith personally called Donald Douglas late one night in 1934, asking for a version with sleeping berths for overnight transcontinental service, originally called the Douglas Sleeper Transport. It had a wingspan of 95 feet and a length of just over 64 feet, powered by two radial engines, typically Pratt & Whitney twin Wasps producing about 1,200 horsepower each, giving it a cruising speed around 207 miles per hour and a range of roughly 1,500 miles. In its standard passenger configuration, it could carry between 21 and 32 people in a relatively quiet, comfortable cabin, a dramatic leap in capacity and comfort compared to the cramped, drafty, unpressurized airliners that came before it. It was, crucially, the first airliner that could make money simply by carrying passenger fares, without relying on government airmail subsidies to stay profitable, which fundamentally reshaped the economics of the entire airline industry almost overnight. Before the DC-3, essentially every American airline lost money carrying passengers and survived only on mail contracts. More than 16,000 were eventually built across every version, including thousands of military variants designated the C-47 Skytrain, known to the British as the Dakota, and affectionately nicknamed the Goonie Bird by American troops who flew and depended on it throughout the war, a nickname borrowed from a clumsy-looking seabird that nonetheless flew beautifully once airborne. When war came, the DC-3's military cousin, the C-47, became one of the most vital transport aircraft of the entire conflict. On the night of June 5th into the early morning of June 6th, 1944, more than 800 C-47s roared across the English Channel towards Normandy in tight formation, many towing gliders loaded with additional troops and equipment, dropping tens of thousands of paratroopers from the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions behind German lines ahead of the main amphibious invasion at dawn. Pilots navigated in near-total darkness through unexpected cloud banks and heavy anti-aircraft fire, and many formations scattered badly, dropping paratroopers miles from their intended zones. Yet the sheer scale and audacity of the operation still succeeded in sowing crucial confusion behind German defenses. General Dwight Eisenhower, reflecting after the war on the tools that won the conflict, specifically named the C-47 alongside the Jeep, the bazooka, and the atomic bomb as among the most decisive pieces of equipment fielded by the Allies. Just a few years after the war ended, the same rugged airframe found itself at the center of one of the Cold War's first great confrontations. In 1948, the Soviet Union blockaded all ground routes into West Berlin, attempting to starve the isolated city into submission and force out the Western Allied garrison stationed there. The Western Allies responded with the Berlin airlift, flying continuous supply missions into the city for nearly a year, landing an aircraft roughly every 3 minutes at the height of the operation. C-47s were among the very first aircraft pressed into service for the airlift, hauling food, coal, and medicine around the clock, before larger C-54s took over the bulk of the heaviest lifting as the operation scaled up. The DC-3 and its military siblings proved, once again, that reliability and simplicity could matter just as much as raw performance in the moments when it counted most. Perhaps the most remarkable part of the DC-3 story is that it never really stopped flying. Today, more than 90 years after its first flight, a meaningful number of original DC-3 and C-47 airframes remain in active service, used as bush planes in remote regions of Africa and South America, where unpaved runways and simple maintenance requirements still favor the design over more modern aircraft, as cargo haulers, as skydiving platforms, and as beautifully restored vintage aircraft appearing at airshows around the world. A handful of aviation companies even continue to offer newly remanufactured DC-3 airframes, fitted with modern turboprop engines, to customers who want the aircraft's legendary rugged simplicity combined with contemporary efficiency. Very few pieces of technology from the 1930s remain in practical, everyday commercial use nearly a century later, let alone ones still trusted to carry people and cargo through genuinely difficult and remote flying conditions. The commercial success of the DC-3 transformed Douglas Aircraft Company, almost overnight from a modest manufacturer, into one of the largest and most powerful industrial firms in the United States. And by the late 1930s, roughly 90% of all airline passengers in the world were flying aboard a DC-3 of one operator or another, an almost total market saturation that no single aircraft type has ever matched before or since. The scale of wartime C-47 production, spread across multiple Douglas factories working around the clock in 3 shifts, also served as a proving ground for the mass manufacturing techniques that would define the American aerospace industry for decades to come. Techniques later applied directly to post-war airliners, jet bombers, and even the earliest American space program hardware built by Douglas and its successor companies. Airlines that continue to operate DC-3s commercially today often do so not out of nostalgia, but out of hard-nosed economics. In parts of the world without paved runways, reliable fuel supplies, or sophisticated maintenance facilities, the DC-3's simple, largely mechanical systems can often be repaired with basic tools and locally sourced parts, something almost impossible with a modern computerized airliner. Canadian operator Buffalo Airways, based in the Northwest Territories and later made famous by a television series following its operations, flew DC-3s on scheduled cargo and passenger routes into the far Canadian Arctic well into the 2010s, precisely because the aircraft's rugged, forgiving handling on rough gravel and ice runways had no modern equivalent. American Airlines, the very airline that commissioned the original design back in 1935, later honored the type by naming every aircraft in its subsequent fleets a flagship, a naming tradition that traces directly back to the DC-3 and continues in the airline's branding today, nearly 90 years later. The DC-3 was built to solve a fundamentally commercial problem. Airlines in the early 1930s could not make air travel profitable carrying passengers alone, and depended heavily on government airmail contracts simply to survive as businesses. Donald Douglas and his engineering team, led by Chief Engineer Arthur Raymond, set out to build an aircraft efficient, spacious, and reliable enough to change that equation entirely. And they succeeded so completely that within just a few years, the DC-3 was carrying the overwhelming majority of American airline passengers nationwide. Its true genius lay in its rugged simplicity, a design so mechanically forgiving and easy to maintain that it thrived equally well on paved metropolitan runways and on muddy dirt strips in the middle of nowhere, requiring minimal specialized ground equipment or infrastructure. That same versatility made it the natural choice for military transport when war broke out just a few years later. And it's that same versatility, decades later, that keeps a small but devoted fleet of DC-3s earning their keep in the skies to this very day. An aircraft that essentially refused to become obsolete.